Welcome to CoinGeekConversations. And if you detect a more authoritative tone from me today, it'll be because, as of last week, I have become a certified cryptocurrency investigator, and I've got a certificate on the wall to prove it. If you're wondering what that means, we're going to be able to answer that question very well today because my guest is the gentleman who has signed my certificate. He is the president and co-founder of the blockchain intelligence group, Lance Morginn. Welcome to the show, Lance.
Thanks, Charles. Thank you so much, and congratulations on your certification.
Thank you very much. I'm very proud.
You're listening to CoinGeek Conversations with Charles Miller.
We'll get back to my achievements later on in this conversation, I hope. But Blockchain Intelligence Group, based in Vancouver, conveniently has the acronym BIG. Just give me a little bit of background, if you would, about the group.
Sure. So I've been in technology since 1994, and one of my business associates that we were in a company back together in 99 came to me in 2014, and I had been looking at crypto since 2013 and wish I had bought it $154 when I became aware of it, but I'm sure we all have those painful memories of letting it go by. And in 2014, he came to me and said, listen, this whole space is growing. The database is growing every 10 minutes. And when you have a growing database with the vast amount of data that's being stored in these transactions, search and analytics are a necessity. And so he asked me to come on board and help build the foundation and help build the company. And so we started in January of 2015. It was about a year later before we put out an announcement that we had the ability to look into the blockchain ecosystem and crypto transactions, and law enforcement was our biggest respondents. So this is how we knew where to focus our attention. And we built a visualization engine that allows an investigator to follow the money flow as many hops as they'd like to go.
And that is that Clue?
That is Clue with a Q. Yeah, stands for Qualitative Law Enforcement Unified Edge. Trying to find acronyms because our initial focus was the U.S. government. Of course, they love acronyms.
So, just for people who haven't seen it, Clue provides a kind of visual pathway through the blockchain, linking different transactions and different addresses. And this can be useful for law enforcement because it basically shows you how to follow the money, right?
Yeah, it not only allows you to follow the money flow. I mean, you can see the transaction hash visually. And I mean, there are tools out there that you can do this manually, but it's very painstaking. It can take months and months to what we can sometimes do in a few minutes. And the other advantage of it is that we identify different entities and in the visualization engine so that law enforcement can see where people are interacting with, and it's through those identification of entities that allow them to, in certain instances when it warrants it, subpoena the KYC information and therefore de-anonymize a pseudo-anonymous person.
So this goes back to this thorny question of whether Bitcoin is anonymous or pseudonymous. Pseudonymous meaning that you can tell what somebody has done, but you can't tell who they are.
That is correct. That is exactly it.
So having looked into this a little bit through your course, the question that I had was, I can see how your software could follow these transactions because each transaction is linked to a previous one. But how do you then relate that to the real world and the people and the real business entities?
Yeah, it actually takes a lot of human work. So we have teams right now on two different continents working 16 hours a day that are looking for different types of entities. So we actually physically open accounts with exchanges. We also have our clients at their discretion have the opportunity to be able to even disclose us their addresses, which does help. But otherwise, it's through opening accounts, putting transactions through those different entities, both inbound and outbound, and then using a technology called clustering and heuristics that allows us to auto map out the rest of the wallets that those entities are using.
So if you open an account with an exchange, say, and it asks you to send money to an address, then you know that that address is that exchange. Is that sort of an example?
That is bang on. You
Right.
got it.
So you can build up a picture of the blockchain world by acquiring as many of these little nuggets of information as you can, I guess.
Correct. And we also, our OSINT team, which stands for Open Source Intelligence Teams, they also look in different videos, they look on different forums, they look on, we're on the dark web, we have accounts with many different dark web marketplaces, and it's by all of these different techniques. And so there's a multitude of different things that help us bring in attribution to identify entities. And then we also use other algorithms to even detect things like mixers.
Right, so those are the ways in which people try to escape being identified by switching bitcoins between addresses.
Exactly, and it also is used to try to commingle coins so that they obfuscate the source of those coins. So it's not even so much about the identification of the person, but it's also the background of those coins, where they came from, and trying to wash them. So it is a money laundering technique.
Well, I'm interested that there's so much human work involved, because when I first heard about Clue, I thought, oh, well, this is going to be sort of the equivalent of the Google search engine, but applied to a blockchain where it just combs through it and sets off some kind of spider that goes through the blockchain. But unfortunately, it's not as easy as that.
Well, you're right on a certain aspect of that, and that is that obviously the ledger is public, fully viewable, and so we can see every single transaction. But it's making sense of that and actually giving some landmarks, so to speak, within that ledger, so that people can start to get a greater understanding of where those funds are coming from, where they're going to, and what type of activities that are taking place along their path.
And what about entities that change their addresses? I mean, I can imagine that you might build up a very impressive database, but then it would kind of quickly go out of date.
It can, and so we with these accounts, we constantly continue to send what we call dust through these different entities to always be looking for the new hot wallets, and so we can stay on top of it as best as possible.
So anyway, that's Clue, which is your first product.
Correct.
Of use to law enforcement, and as you explain in the course, very handy for explaining things to a jury, because it presents the transactions in a very visual way where different clusters are joined together and you can sort of see the flow of the money through it. Correct.
And it also not only gives it a report in a visual format, but you can have it in an Excel format, so you can see the transaction hash, the time, the units of value moved, and be able to allow a judge to follow the money through an Excel format as well as visually, so they can really, without understanding blockchain, without understanding how crypto works, as long as they understand a credit and a debit, if we boil it down, then they can be confident in their judgment, whichever way that might go. And it was also used. It's also used by compliance officers. They're being subpoenaed a lot these days, and this just expedites their report that they would then provide to law enforcement.
And how much success have you had in the courts with this tool?
We are recognized at the federal level in the United States as expert witness testimony providers. We've defended some of the largest exchanges on the planet. Successfully. We have also helped some countries take their first case to court. And really, most of them we can't publish because they're still under NDA requirements.
Right, but when you have appeared in court, then presumably there's no problem with that. We'll see you in the court records as witnesses or whatever.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
Well, let's go on to your another tool that you've invented, which is BitRank Verify.
Sure. Well, we realized that we're sitting on a vast amount of data, and that we can actually provide financial organizations risk scoring behind addresses and transactions. So think of it as an Equifax, a TransUnion, Dun & Bradstreet, but instead of a credit score, it's a risk score. And so when we first see a wallet, it falls under the low risk category. And then as it transacts, this will cause a score to go up or down. We are very granular in our information, and our scoring isn't something that's high, medium, low, and or neutral to good. There's not four different sort of categories. It's all the way from 0 to 100. And so a score could be 32, a score could be 12, a score could be 98. So we have 54 categories, 9,800 flags. The more somebody transacts, the more that their score would change.
So what is going to pull down your score?
Things like if you had purchased something from the dark market. Now, that doesn't mean that you were buying something illegal, because 45% of the goods in the dark market are legal. But we give an indication to a compliance officer that we have seen you interacting with the dark market, and therefore you need to look at the other flags that have been built up around it to figure out, is this somebody that we want to look into further, or does this? And also that you would look at the transaction amount. I mean, if they're buying something for $5 from the dark market, then obviously it's probably nothing. But it gives an indication for them to be able to realize that they need to go look further. Other things that would cause a score to drop would be if it was a terrorism address, somebody that we recognize providing child exploitation.
I think your reputational effect goes back more than one step, doesn't it? It's not just the person you've bought from, but it's the associations of that person as well.
Well, currently we are one hop forward and one hop backward. And we did that because that is what the traditional banking world is required over fiat globally. But we are looking to give further indication with what we would call multi-hop. Now, in certain instances, that one hop doesn't come into play, such as, let's say somebody went and created a brand new address, moved their terrorism funds into that brand new address, and then moved it from that new address to another new address to another new address. Now, in those instances, that taint would carry over in full force, because we can assume, and not only through it being only one in and one out, but the clustering heuristic software would also at times show that those are related. Depends on where they created them, depends on what time, which would determine if the clustering would pick it up or not. And also, clustering usually uses what's known as change addresses to help map those things out. But in the scenario where it's one in and one out, then the taint would carry on through.
I think you've sort of answered my question, or what I was wondering about with this, which is that if I go into my local shop and give them a £20 note and I get £10 back in change, just because that £10 might have been used in a drug deal before it came into the shop, that shouldn't implicate me.
Correct. You hit the nail on the head, and that's exactly it. I mean, the money in your wallet, I have no idea where you got it from in the real world, and if I'm receiving it from you, I mean, I shouldn't be affected by you and I know I trust you, and I know you have a real job and you're not a nefarious actor, and therefore I have to assume that the funds in your wallet are the same. But interestingly enough, if we had that visibility, in cash, we'd all be quite shocked, right, as to
Absolutely.
where that dollar came from to behind us.
With BitRank Verify, is that still mainly of interest to law enforcement, or are there other enterprise uses for that tool?
Yeah, it is used by digital banks, exchanges, ATM operators, and law enforcement. I mean, it allows them to get a quick understanding of where we've seen the funds before they even get into the visualization graph. But for compliance officers, it just allows them to quickly ascertain, do we need to look into this further? So the way that financial organizations use BitRank is, there's two ways. Some implement it where they check an address before they even allow a client to transfer funds to them, so they can understand if they are already opening up a can of worms and creating a whole bunch of work for the compliance officer. And then others will just check the transaction side of things. So in the first instance, people that are checking addresses before the funds come in, obviously once a client sees a deposit address, they could use 5 or 6 other addresses to conclude that transaction. And so this is why, no matter what, everyone's always checking the transaction ID to see if there were additional addresses, if the score changed for that. But other organizations are even checking up front, kind of like when you invest into an ICO. They want to know the address where the funds are coming from and the amount, obviously, but that's not so much necessary for what we're referring to here. And then they would then show you the deposit address. So some organizations do that to reduce the workload on compliance officers, and others are just checking the transactions and then figuring out what needs to take place.
Right. So I'm guessing that both of these tools are subscription models where businesses will subscribe and you'll be constantly updating the software. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. We do have one-time pay-as-you-go packages that allow sort of early stage companies to be able to start to monitor and allow them to feel out, where their volume's going, and then they can decide what subscription model they want to take or get into after they've used up the credits in the first one.
Right. Well, let's have a word about the course that I did, which I really enjoyed, I must say.
Great.
For people who don't know, haven't come across it, it was about 6. You say 6 to 8 hours of work, which I think is
Correct.
about right. Mine was a little bit longer than that because I failed one of the modules, unfortunately, and had to do it again. You're very strict in that you require an 80% correct answers at the final exam of each module. And unfortunately, I was below 80, so I had to go back. So that was another hour or so. But I now know, and I'm glad to say I passed the final module with 100%. So I was really pleased with myself, and I'm very pleased with my certificate. So it was good fun. And very, very nicely put together with good text and audio to listen to, and some really, really good videos, I think. So you don't have to really want to be in law enforcement to find it interesting, I think. Because
no, not at all.
I learned a lot about the dark web and actually just basic stuff about how Bitcoin addresses work and stuff. But I mean, so who is it really aimed at?
It's aimed at both sides, any kind of financial investigators, so FIs, anyone that's a compliance officer, anyone that's in risk, and of course law enforcement themselves. Financial organizations are demanding from their staff to understand the risks. How can we get involved and meet our regulatory requirements? And so our course really does allow people to get that knowledge, and we really do give very good real world insights to things, and it's not really just about training in our tools. I think it's only module 5 that really we give some examples of our tools so that people can actually understand how to do an investigation. But by no means does this course feel like you're really just buying a brochure to our services.
I mean, you do obviously talk about BitRank Verified and Clue, But actually, I found those, in a way, the most interesting parts, because that's where the problem of how to trace this stuff and the knowledge that you've given about how the blockchain works actually come together. And you sort of get an aha moment. Yes, I see.
Right.
If you did do that, then you would be able to follow this. So that was, I didn't have any problem with that.
Good. Yeah, and it's amazing when people do see what you can extract from the blockchain and how you can present it visually, along with attribution and the other things that we've mentioned earlier in the conversation. People do have that aha moment and go, wow, I didn't realize.
You know, you made a presentation at the CoinGeek conference recently, and CoinGeek is very focused on Bitcoin SV, obviously. Your business is agnostic as to different blockchains, but how would you characterize, does BSV have anything different from the others, or is it just another one on the list as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think the mandate about regulation and being transparent and what BSV has as a vision for itself is different. In the sense of the transactions themselves, they're the same. I mean, it's a fork of Bitcoin. Obviously, it has much greater capabilities and volume and these kinds of things, but otherwise, no. From the back end, it's very similar to Bitcoin Cash.
But I think that, as you say, in relation to debates about regulation and your involvement with law enforcement, that plays very much into the emphasis of BSV on being a legitimate business within the financial establishment and within the business establishment.
Exactly. And I mean, look, their market cap is, last I looked, it was top 7 or 5. It's been a few weeks since I've looked at CoinMarketCap. Things kind of pop up. I realize, oh, the shuffle's changed. But we're going down the list ourselves of the top 20 cryptocurrencies based on market cap, and BSV was an obvious one for us, just based on the other objectives and missions that they've got around the appearance of Bitcoin SV.
Bitcoin and most of the cryptos have had a little bit of a revival in the last month or so. And I guess that I think we could probably say they're not going to go away. And I think we could also probably say, from some of the political activities in Washington and other places, that there is going to be more and more regulation, more attention from regulators in this area, all of which I suppose is good news for you.
It is. Obviously, regulation does help our BitRank Verified, because if people are required to be monitoring the transactions that they're doing, then it's not a nice to have, it's a required to have. I mean, we have seen over the last few years, people are getting ahead of it, showing their regulators that they are trying to be proactive and get on their good books. But obviously, when regulation is in place and it's mandated, that does help our organization. And I completely agree with you. We can't turn off the internet. I think the only way crypto's going away is if we turn off the internet. So it's definitely here to stay. And governments have validated it by confiscating coins and selling them. So I think the next layer of regulation being promoted by FATF is, it's almost sort of a step backwards, but I think governments really want to have that comfortability that that they can try to make this as transparent as possible. Overall, yes, you're right. It does help companies like ours when regulation is implemented, because it just makes it a must-have.
Well, we should end in a minute, but let me just end, if I may, by taking you back right to the beginning, which you mentioned that back in 1999 you worked for a dot-com incubator, another time where people were working out what technology could be used for. How do you compare the atmosphere around the potential of blockchain now with what you were working with back in 1999?
Well, maybe we have maybe 2 or 3 more minutes. It's
Yeah.
I saw a lot of similarities in the sense of people just kind of throwing money. I mean, even today, it's getting less and less, but you can walk around and ask people if they've heard of blockchain, and their response might be, "Is that Bitcoin?" Um, and people are just kind of throwing money, and that's why I do think that Bitcoin itself will continue to climb. I think we could see 60 to maybe a high of 100,000 next year, 300,000 by 2023. And that's because when people do understand things a little bit more, they've heard it so much that they're going to go with the default. And if you're talking about cryptocurrency to the person that's just really getting the basic understanding, they're going to default to Bitcoin. And therefore, when they look to make their first investment, they're going to choose Bitcoin, Bitcoin SV, Bitcoin Cash, one of those main core forks, and so I think that it kind of reminds me of what people were doing back then, where they heard about a new .com through their electrician, and they were just throwing money at it without truly grasping what was really going on behind the scenes. So, and then as well, of course, the internet has affected all of our lives, but I almost think that that blockchain itself and crypto is a good example of what blockchain can do, is going to really have profound effects on all of our lives, and just transforming everything more than we could ever believe.
But not in such an obvious way, perhaps.
No.
With the internet, you knew when you had the internet, you knew when you were on Amazon or Yahoo or whatever. And you could tell your friend, to some extent, what it was all about. I think that this is a more complicated proposition for people.
Yeah, it will be behind the scenes. I mean, obviously the internet is so much more obvious because it was the tool to access that. Obviously now this is just the highway for blockchain to operate. But 97% of businesses have a database problem that blockchain can solve. So we won't know that blockchain's behind that improvement, but it'll be there.
Right.
So yeah, exactly right.
Well, Lance, thank you so much. Thank you very much for my certificate, which you've kindly signed in the PDF anyway. I really enjoyed the course. I learned a lot, and it's been great talking to you today as well. So good luck.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. Yeah, it's good to see the certificate on your wall. And
yes, there we go.
That's great. Excellent. Well, keep an eye out for more courses. The next module is released next week. Advanced crypto analytics gets into things like coin joining transactions, atomic swaps. But anyway, thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And please take care in today's world.
Yeah, speak soon. Thanks so much, Lance.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much to Lance Morginn for kicking off 2021 on CoinGeek Conversations. Please join me again next week when I'll be talking to a Bitcoin and blockchain critic, David Gerard, about his book about Facebook's Libra project. So that's CoinGeek Conversations next week. Thanks for listening from me, Charles Miller. Till then, goodbye.